My first experience in a sauna. Let me tell you about how my first sauna bathhouse experience went, which is still one of the most horrible ones that I've ever faced in my entire life. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Sierra Jonas. I'm currently a 26-year-old girl, and I'm proud to tell you that I'm a lesbian. But being a lesbian does not automatically give consent to some women that I'm available or okay with having sex with just any woman, which, by the way, I have experienced many times. I acknowledged my sexual preference when I was 14 years old and had a crush on a classmate, Haley. She was gorgeous, but she was straight, so I never told her how I felt about her. I'd never been to a sauna before the age of 19. It was also planned by one of my best friends to surprise me on my birthday with a free sauna bath coupon for a newly opened bathhouse as a gift. I know that it was because I had mentioned several times that I wanted to go to a sauna bathhouse at least once before I turned 20. Every single person who knew me was aware of the fact that I was a lesbian, and I guess that most of them thought that if I was a lesbian, then that meant that I already had sex. But in reality, that was not the case, because I was very much a virgin. At that time, I had no idea about the opinions that my friends had of me, just because of my different sexual preferences. So I took the opportunity and went to the sauna to enjoy my time there to relax. As I entered there was a huge lobby where people were waiting, but the place did not have a crowd or anything. There were only a few people there, and on the left corner, there was the reception area. I went there and gave them the coupon. The lady who was there was very polite, and then gave me a warm welcome with a nice smile. She told me about the changing area and the bathrobes, which I was supposed to change before entering the sauna bathroom. When I was done changing into the robe, another lady guided me towards a wooden cabin type room. As I entered, I noticed that the wooden structure, which comprised a hot stone to produce the steam, and the hot temperature was just the perfect way to relax my muscle tension. The lady gave me a few instructions and then left. There wasn't anyone else in there at the time except for me, so I made myself comfortable by removing the bathrobe and starting to relax there. It was my first experience after all. I knew that there were some saunas that allowed multiple people to enjoy the same bath, but I thought that maybe this was one of those private ones. While I was relaxing, I fell asleep without even realizing it. I noticed in my sleep that someone walked in, but I thought it must be my imagination. As I was getting more relaxed and sweating, I felt the set of hands grow up in my breasts. For a few seconds, I thought I was dreaming, but then I jolted awake when I felt a wet body touching mine. When I opened my eyes, I saw two naked women looking at me with full eyes of lust. One was sitting beside me and the other one was standing in front of me. I felt a tightening feeling inside my chest, which was making me scared. "Sorry ladies, you must be mistaken. I'm not here for these kinds of services, so I'll be leaving now," I said while laughing nervously and stood up to leave. But as soon as I stood up, the woman who was standing in front of me pushed me onto the lap of the other woman who was sitting and then climbed on top of me. As I was about to shout at her, she forcefully started kissing me while I struggled to get away from them. They started touching me in inappropriate areas, pinching me, etc. I somehow managed to kick the woman who was on me and try to run, but the other woman grabbed my hair and started pulling it towards herself. When I tried to scream, they tied a rope over my mouth and then tied my hands with the same tightly. While one pinned me down and held me tightly, the other one played with my body and started to do things to me which felt quite painful. I had no idea how, but they had brought things along with them to rape me and hurt me. I struggled so much, but she kept raping me, and when she was done with me, she switched the positions with the other woman, and then she started to rape me to her heart's content. What I was feeling at the moment was not a feeling of pleasure at all. It was simply just pain and horror. I did not know when I passed out between that horrifying experience, but when I gained consciousness for a few minutes, I was being carried out naked by staff members. They looked worried, so I guess that they had no idea how that had happened to me. I passed out again, and when I woke up, I was laying on a bed in the sauna, and there was a nurse treating me. They apologized to me, saying that it was because of their carelessness that they did not realize that I passed out due to temperature and staying too long in the sauna bath. They said that the reason they didn't take me to the ER was that if they did, their reputation would be tarnished. I told them that two women had raped me, but I guess they did not believe me. I called my parents to take me home. When they got there, I quietly followed them home. You didn't know that staying too long in a sauna could cause low blood pressure and dizziness. You should have been careful. I stayed silent and listened to my mom scolding. I did not tell my parents about this horrific experience because I knew that they would blame it on me being a lesbian. The next day when I reached my college, my friends came rushing towards me. "So, how was the sauna? Did you enjoy it?" One of them said in a tone filled with excitement. I could not respond to that question. "And how was the secret surprise that we prepared for you? Did you ladies enjoy yourselves?" I jolted my head towards the girl who said that, and it was Emily, who used to claim to be my best friend. The horror from the sauna came crashing into my mind, which started to fill my eyes with tears. "It was you who did that to me?" I asked with a quavering voice. My whole body was shaking from remembering the trauma of that day. It felt like I was reliving it. She nodded her head hesitantly and then corrected herself by saying, "Aren't you like gay? Isn't it normal for you to have sex with women?" I couldn't believe my ears and just walked out of there. I stopped talking to them after that day and slowly cut off all ties like that. So that was my first and last sauna bath experience, and also how I lost my virginity.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all this support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I graduated from Sam Houston State University in Texas back in the early 2000s. Like most college students, I definitely encountered a handful of weird and quirky individuals, but none I'd remember like Bart. Bart wasn't his real name, it was Thomas, but since he had the middle name of Bartlett, he went by Bart because it suited him better. And boy did it ever. He had a mischievous streak that was a mile wide and often verged on criminal. At best, he was the life and soul of the party. At worst, he seemed downright dangerous. Sometimes he got it into his head that certain people were just out to get him, and he always talked about his parents like they were the two evil tyrants in his life, when it was common knowledge that they spoiled him rotten with cars, gifts, and a free ride through college. One time, when this one kid made him mad, Bart broke into the guy's dorm and tried to steal his computer. I think he only dodged getting kicked out of school after he convinced everyone, including the victim, that it was just kind of a prank gone wrong. But we all knew the truth. He really had wanted to hurt that kid. I just didn't think he had an actual violent bone in his body. But as it turned out, he actually kind of did. I remember he asked me out of the blue one time, "How much money would it take for you to kill someone?" We were always asking each other dumb questions like that. Like, who'd win between a bear and a lion? Weird would-you-rather questions that were usually pretty not safe for work. So as much as I didn't take the question seriously, I still gave a moment's worth of thought. I remember telling him I wasn't sure, that it'd have to be at least $500,000. But then he looks all annoyed and asks, "You wouldn't kill someone for 10 grand?" I responded, "God no, dude. It'd have to be like retirement money." He comes back with 20 grand? I just laughed the question off at that point, but then he just ups it by 10 grand at a time until I gave him a definite no. A few moments of silence go by while he thinks, then he says, 50. I'd give you 50. I'm literally about to ask him why he's obsessing when someone else appeared and called out to us and Bart dropped the issue. I remember thinking it was a weird question to begin with, but the way he asked it was even weirder. Almost like he was really thinking about trying to hire a hitman or something. But we always talked about dumb stuff like that, so I guess I just forgot about it after a while. Sometime later, Bart drops out of college for some reason, probably something to do with the fact that he barely did any of the work, and that was pretty much the last we saw of him. I mean, we keep in touch every so often, planning to do stuff but never actually doing it. Then this one time, Bart is texting my roommate, who in turn tells me that Bart was saying he was going to come visit, only he was serious this time. He said he was about to get his hands on some trust fund of his parents that he had kept safe for him, and how he'd pay for us all to go down to Mexico for spring break the following year. I'm like, cool. I didn't believe he'd actually come visit, but I figured maybe a cash injection might help him get his butt into gear. Bart never did come to visit, though, and we found out why when my roommate called me into his bedroom to show me something on his computer. Bart's entire family had been killed, and he'd been shot in the arm in what seemed like a home invasion gone wrong. We tried calling him a bunch, but he didn't answer his phone, so we figured he either wasn't out of the hospital yet or he just wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone, which I found perfectly understandable at the time. I can't even imagine how devastated I'd be if something like that happened to my family. Then, over the course of a few months, the truth came out. It started when Bart was arrested. We were just confused at first, but the only thing we could think of was that the cops had somehow found drugs or something else illegal in Bart's possession while searching his home. I mean, we knew he'd been shot in the arm. We'd seen it on the news, and they had a suspect in custody who'd fired all 10 shots or whatever. So why arrest Bart? Long story short, they arrested Bart because the cops found out he actually knew the home invader. Then once they checked his phone, they found text messages from the same guy where Bart was arranging for the guy to kill his own family. They even talked about how the guy would need to shoot Bart to make it look authentic, and how the shooter had to make sure his entire family was dead, otherwise he wouldn't get paid out of the inheritance. I knew Bart was crazy, and I knew he could be a little impulsive sometimes, but dear God, to have your own parents murdered in such a horrifyingly elaborate way, I had no idea he was evil too. And that's what freaks me out about it. You'd never have guessed that Bart was capable of something like that. At least I didn't want to believe he was. I heard one of his parents actually survived and begged the state not to put him on death row. They succeeded too. So I guess that's some small silver lining from a horrifying little episode in my life.
There is this app called Tinder, and a lot of my friends are trying to get on it and get laid. I was like my friends trying to make it possible for me getting laid with the app. Since I had no idea how the app thing works, I called in my friend for help. They decided to set up my account and took photographs for the profile, and then set me up good. They decided to make it one heck of an adventure for me, and said that they will set me up for a blind date with the girl. And they decided to do so in order for me to have a fun evening for once. My date was set for Monday, and I was to be dressed in red. And so I did. I left for the pizza place nearby. I was dressed sharp, and the anticipation was too much for me. It was too much. As I sat there, I saw no girl in a while coming in, and then a guy approached my table and called my name. As I got up, he shook my head, and as he did, he said his name was Morris, and he told me that I was his date for the night. I told him I was waiting for one Emily, and said that maybe it was a mistake. But then he showed me the profile of mine that was made for me by my friends, and the thing they did was made my profile on Grindr instead of Tinder, and it kind of made me much more furious than I thought. I told the man that it was my friend that set me up for it, and it was nothing but a big prank. And then Morris got really aggressive and told me that he did not come all the way to just go empty-handed. And he came close and whispered in my ear, "Least you can do is give me a hand in the bathroom." I flipped and said, "Look man, I apologize on behalf of my friends, but there's no way I'm doing anything like that." And as I said that, he came in to forcefully kiss me, and it was then that I punched him. And as I walked out, I was not really feeling good about the day and was actually pissed about my friends. An hour in from that incident, the same guy circled me around the block and then just sucker punched me from behind. And as he stood on top of me trying to unzip his pants, I pushed him, and he was accompanied by one other man who was further chasing me into an alley. And as I felt closed in, I gave up and came up with a different plan than what they had in mind. Since I had the key to the flat and knew that my friends would be coming in right at this moment from the bar, probably hammered out of their mind, I decided to plot a revenge against them and included Morrison and his friend in the plan. And that is when I let them into the flat and showed them the way to the room. To save my ass from these two psycho horny men, I gave up the ass of my friend. It was probably morally very sadistic of me to think of, but as it turns out, my friend that I have been living in with months was closeted too, and the thought that maybe he would run out of the apartment with his pants down scared out of his mind was cut short when I heard 3 voices of pleasured moaning coming out of the room. It was the last night that I spent in that apartment, mostly because in the coming days, the complete apartment became a big gay orgy party place, and that was the last thing I wanted to be a part of. Not that I was homophobic, it was just that I couldn't stand my friend being all smug and happy about his many boyfriends. Meanwhile, he almost got me raped for who now was his platonic boyfriend. I used to get bullied, and so did pretty much all of my friends. I witnessed some of it, and I couldn't believe how cruel and degrading people could be. One day, while talking to my friend Sally, who is my best friend, she brought up a boy she had made friends with in conversation. We were on holiday at the time, and I already knew this kid. He was quite pretty smart awkward and very clearly sad. She explained how he got bullied because of his voice and how his ex-girlfriend was spreading rumors that he was faking his condition, and that he didn't really sound like that. She wanted to know if she could let him sit with us at lunch because he usually didn't have anyone to sit with. I obviously agreed to it, not really knowing that much about him. I hadn't spoken to him a couple of times, and he seemed pretty happy about having someone to talk to. But I couldn't see any personality within him. Everything he did just seemed odd, like it wasn't really him. I know that sounds weird, but that's how I felt. His name was Samuel, an unusual name, but quite nice. He seemed like a kind person, but he still carried a weird vibe. After a while of talking to him, Sally and I got to know him better. He liked dark humor much like me, and he was really into Doctor Who. None of us really knew much about it, but we still let him talk about his interests so that he could feel more comfortable around us. He talks a lot, and I didn't even realize he had feelings for Sally until he asked me if she liked Harry Potter and what her favorite colors were. She soon realized this too, but was still getting over her ex-boyfriend, so she made it clear that she wasn't interested. But he wouldn't leave her alone. He was always next to her or somewhere nearby, and it started to get to her, and she hated it. She felt as though she couldn't be alone. So I tried to do something about it. I wanted to help, so I turned his attention from her to me. I started hanging out with him more, often listening to his terrible, unfunny jokes, to his strange interests, and to everything he said. I tried to make it seem like I wanted to be there, even though at this point I really didn't. I wanted to get away from him though, and he was beginning to tire me out emotionally with him constantly being there. He wouldn't leave me alone, and wouldn't even walk home with me and my friend Grace, despite the fact that he lives in the opposite direction. At one point, I was going through a particularly hard time and being desperate for help and someone to talk to. I turned to him. I know it was the wrong move, but desperation led me to him. He asked a video call, so I agreed. I was crying, and he tried to calm me down, eventually succeeding, and just started making his horrible jokes and talking about things I like and stuff. He actually shouldn't have known about, but I didn't think much of it at the time because I just wanted someone to make me laugh. Laughter got me through a lot of hard times, and I began to think he wasn't so bad after all. I started talking to him through video almost every day after school, and I noticed him being around even more often. Then one day, he said he needed to tell me something, which turned out to be a confession. He confessed that he had a crush on me. But I had to go because my mom wanted to watch a movie with me when I got home. I had about 10 video and voice messages from him, all of them of him apologizing because he'd apparently thought I hadn't actually left to go watch a movie, but was instead avoiding him because of what he told me. I felt horrible. I didn't mean to upset him, and he was crying. I explained that I really did go to watch a movie, and that's why I had left. Fortunately, he understood. After a while of hanging out with him, I began to get tired of him again, with him constantly being there. And now also knowing that he had a crush on me, I thought back to the situation with Sally, and began to spot the same things in our friendship. He got clingy and just damn right annoying. So I politely explained to him that I didn't want to sit with him at lunch anymore. He still insisted that I sit with him, but I declined, and just told him to go away every time he approached our table. One particular incident, though, made me lose all respect for him. He would sometimes randomly walk with me and Grace, as I mentioned before. I often stayed at her house after school, and we would watch weird videos we'd found in her recommended feed, when about an hour later we heard a knock at the door. She went to answer, thinking it was her parents. But needless to say, it wasn't. It was Samuel. I heard his voice and dropped to the floor, hoping he hadn't seen me. After a long while of silence, I proceeded to army crawl over to the door to see if he was still there. "I'm lost. I can't find my house. Can you guys help me?" he asked. Liar. How could he possibly not know where his house is? And it's not like I knew where it was either. I'd never been there. He persisted and continued to knock on Grace's door. She was hiding in the living room, and we came to the decision that we would hide in the conservatory until he went away. So that's what we did. Some time passed before Grace chose to climb onto the desk and see if it was still there. She turned to look at me and pointed in the direction that she was looking. "He's still there." He was looking directly at me. He waved at me. She whispered this couldn't be happening. This wasn't happening. We weren't trapped by him. He wasn't outside. This is all a joke or something, but Grace's face looked so scared and in way angry. I awkwardly got my stuff and told her I was going to head out to get him the hell away from her house. She reluctantly agreed, and I left with him. I offered to walk him down to the shop and let him go from there, but he refused to let me leave. He told me he couldn't see very well and that he'd almost gotten hit by a car earlier. Complete BS. This boy had boasted many times about how good his eyesight was, so there was no way he suddenly couldn't see despite his apparent sight problems. He flawlessly led me to his house at this point. I was in an area completely unknown to me, and I began to worry how I would get home. It was already dark, and there was no way I was going to wander an area I had never been in, especially in the dark. Who knows what kind of creeps would have been hiding out there? I brought this up to him, and he assured me that his mom would drop me off, but I didn't want that. I didn't want him to know where I lived with how he was acting. I was fully convinced he would try to pull something. I suffer from symptoms of schizophrenia, and this didn't at all make it better for me. I felt unbelievably unsafe at that moment and wished that I hadn't left Grace's. Countless minutes dragged on as I sat and waited in his room, surrounded by his cats. They were the only thing keeping me from snapping. After they dropped me off at my house, I went to my mom and broke out in tears. I couldn't take it anymore. He'd gone too far this time. So my mom said she was going to report him for it, because he wasn't going to cause me this much stress and get away with it. I agreed at the time, but soon after, I asked my mom to just forget it. Maybe this would all go away. But it didn't. The next day, I told him that I wasn't allowed to talk to him anymore because my mom told me not to. But he still refused to leave me alone. I obviously got mad due to having enough of his crap and had a complete mental breakdown, saying that I was going to get Tim, my boyfriend, on him because I was done. Grace and Felicity, my other friend, tried to take me to one of their most trusted teachers. But a few other teachers, despite seeing me crying hysterically, refused to let us through, because they said that she probably wouldn't be able to help us. So we found another teacher and explained the whole situation to her. She assured me that she would speak with him, and attempt to get this sorted out throughout the entirety of my geography class. I was having major anxiety, but I calmed down a bit in math. And when lunch came about, I saw Grace standing next to the door holding someone else's stuff. "What the hell is this about?" I questioned. "I don't know. He just dumped it on me and left. Now he's in the toilet," she told me. Then one of my male friends who knew about the situation, Chad, approached us and offered to take his stuff while we left. I thanked him a million times and we hurried away. We reached the hall and sat down at the table where Sally and Felicity were, and everything seemed fine until he showed up again. He seemed pretty angry, so I assumed the teacher we'd spoken to had talked to him. I began to panic, thinking that this wouldn't end well, that we were in danger. Then Rafita, another close friend, walked over to him, attempting to save me from an episode. She told him that I didn't feel good and that he should probably go. But he completely ignored her and asked me if I wanted some food. I nervously shook my head and he started saying that he was going to pass out and that he needed to sit down. Rafita calmly told him that he could go sit somewhere else because this isn't the best time. He turned to her, fury in his eyes, and yelled. Now I hid my face in my hands and felt weak, like I was going to start hyperventilating. He sat down and Rafita, having had enough of this too, grabbed my arm and said, "Come on, let's go," while dragging me away, and the others followed. He also left the hall, but luckily he didn't follow us. Then all of a sudden, the built-up stress and anger caused me to start hyperventilating and crying, because I felt like I put not only myself, but the others in danger. I didn't know what to do anymore. Then Chad came and said that he'd talk to him for me, and asked him to sit with him instead of us once again. I thanked him with all my heart, and we went back to the hall. One of my old friends, Shayla, is now transgender, and his name is Jaden, came up to us, and we told her about the entire situation. She told us that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and that he had a book in which he wrote about plans for mass homicide, and that he called it Samuelism. Then Chad returned and told me that Samuel wants to talk to me after science, and how I probably should, so after science I waited for him. And he said he hadn't realized he was causing a problem. Shut up, of course, you did. How can you be so dumb oblivious to your own actions? He then proceeded to tell me how bad his day was, and I ended up having to walk him to the office. I told Tim about it, and he said he would meet me after school on Wednesdays and sort it out if he didn't stop. I was very thankful for this. I just wanted Samuel out of my life, but he still wouldn't leave me alone. After all, that he was specifically moved next to me in English class after everything that happened on Friday. He still persisted with his little games that day. Was parents' evening at school. So I went with my mom and left my phone at home. When I got back and looked at my phone, my heart dropped. 20 messages, 20 of them within half an hour, all from Samuel. I started ranting about all of this to myself and even went into the bathroom to practice what I was going to say to him the next day. I started crying again, because all of this was just too much to bear. But then I decided to do something. I decided to call him out on all of his stuff and inform them that a troubled childhood is an excuse to put someone in this situation. He actually tried to guilt trip me into forgiving him by telling me his awful childhood. And I admit that I felt bad for him because no one should have to go through that kind of pain. But to show him that he isn't the only one who has to deal with things in the past, I told him about myself halfway through me explaining that I had a lot of trouble showing and experiencing emotions as a child, and that I had a lot of violent homicidal thoughts. He interrupted me, saying that he also didn't have emotions and that he had tried to kill someone because he thought it was funny. This actually pissed me off. because not only was he interrupting me to add to his story and trying to make me feel even worse, he was trying to one-up me on my suffering. If you ask me, that is absolutely disgusting. You don't compare struggles because you only have your own experiences to go off. Don't try to make another person feel as though their problems don't matter, and that they shouldn't ask for help when their problems because they're too small. That's just wrong. I calmly told him that I let him finish his story without interruptions, and that it was only fair for him to let me finish mine. That way, too, he quickly apologized, being caught out on his crap. I told him the rest of my story, and let him realize that he really wasn't the only one who had gone through stuff in his childhood. He then began begging me for another chance at being my friend, but I declined, and decided to talk with Sally instead, ignoring the rest of his messages every day. Until that point, and even for a while after, just me feeling like I was going to die, I actually contemplated suicide for a while because I couldn't deal with his constant presence. I was afraid to leave my house because I felt like he would be there. I know this is a bit weird, but I felt that way because of the schizophrenia. My episodes began getting more frequent and severe. There were periods of time where I could not concentrate in class and actually could hear what the teacher was saying because of my auditory hallucinations. I generally felt like crap, and it got so bad that I felt like I didn't want to be here anymore. But after telling him to bugger off, I felt like a giant weight has been removed from my chest and that I could breathe my own air again. Not for long though, because he kept trying to come back into my life despite me refusing to be his friend ever again. I was still there for him, but only in absolute emergencies, and by that, I mean that only if he was on the verge of dying. I wish I could say that he left me alone since then and that I never saw him again after that, but I couldn't. Because I still see him around at school, and unfortunately, he's friends with my friend Brian. So I still have to hang out around him, which sucks. He annoys me purposely to get my attention by calling himself God and other things that suggest he thinks way too highly of himself. Anyway, that's about it for my story. Samuel, please shut up about your godly status for a second and realize that the reason people hate you is because you do this not once, not twice, but always. So pause, think, and stop so that you don't mount any more brains.